Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Almassian. Putin just dropped a bombshell revelation on the peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. But if you were paying close attention to the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine at the beginning of the war, it's not shocking at all. So in this video, we're going to connect the dots by addressing the timeline of the peace talks that started after February 2022 between Moscow and Kyiv to see who ruined and urged Ukraine not to engage in any sorts of peace talks with Russia. First things first, Russian offensive on Ukraine formally started on the 28th of February 2022. Russian armed forces quickly tried to surround Kyiv, and they managed to do so from the northern side of Kyiv, if you remember the map of control. And they were trying to encircle Kyiv in order to put pressure on the Kyiv government so that the Kyiv government compromises and signs on an agreement. So negotiations started quickly, just a few days after the Russian offensive. The first round of negotiations started on March the 4th in Belarus, which failed, and there was no agreement between the both sides. The second and the third rounds started on March 7, again 2022, on the Belarusian-Ukrainian borders. There were some advances in the talks during these talks this time, but the fourth and the fifth rounds of talks, which were held in Istanbul on March 10th, between March 10th and March 14, it seems now that they were fruitful, and there was at least a draft agreement between the both sides, and there were so many details in it that the representative of the Ukrainian side has put his signature on this draft agreement between Russia and Ukraine, which would have ended the war between both sides. And this is what I'm going to come next in the next part of this video, and I will show you what Putin said in this regard. But what happened after this, after the fourth and the fifth rounds of talks? So after March 14th, we remember that in March, exactly the same month, the SBU, the security apparatus of Ukraine, they assassinated Denis Kyiv, who was a member of the Ukrainian negotiating team, accusing him of treason. So one of the members of this negotiating team from the Ukrainian side who was negotiating with Russia, he was assassinated by the SBU because they accused him of treason, and they said that this person was leaking information to the Russian side. How much is that story is accurate? I don't know, but the indications show that this person wanted to strike a deal with Russia, and the SBU were informed, whether it's informed by Kyiv or by a third party, which I'm going to come next. They asked the SBU to assassinate this person. After that, this was in March, then comes April 2022. On the 9th of April 2022, all of a sudden, Boris Johnson flies on an unannounced trip to Kyiv, and he meets with Zelensky. And apparently, Boris Johnson told Zelensky that he cannot sign on a peace treaty with Russia. And this is the exact article that I was looking for. Yes, Diplomacy Wars. Did Boris Johnson help stop a peace deal in Ukraine? This is, guys, from September 2022. Russia and Ukraine may have agreed on a tentative deal to end the war in April, so exact month that I was mentioning, guys, on the fourth and the fifth rounds in March, between March 10th and the March 14th in Istanbul. Apparently, they have agreed on a tentative deal to end the war in April, according to a recent piece in Foreign Affairs. Russia would withdraw to its position on February 23rd when it controlled part of the Donbas region and all of Crimea, and in exchange, Ukraine will promise not to seek NATO membership and instead receive security guarantees from a number of countries. The news highlights the impact of former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's efforts to stop negotiations, as journalist Branko Marcetic noted on Twitter. The decision to scuttle the deal coincided with Johnson's April visit to Kyiv, during which he reportedly urged Ukrainian President Zelensky to break off talks with Russia for two key reasons. One, Putin cannot be negotiated with, and the West isn't ready for the war to end. Guys, this was just, the deal was almost ready. There was a draft resolution or draft agreement. Both sides were happy with it and they were intending to sign on it. But Boris Johnson flew to Kyiv and told Zelensky, you cannot do it. And we do not really know if he represented the entire collective West or he represented himself. But I do believe that Britain and the United States, they had similar position. I'm sure Germany didn't want for this war to be prolonged. But what happened afterwards? Let's remember Zelensky banned negotiations after the visit of Boris Johnson to Kiev. So this was in October 2022. Ukrainian President Zelensky released a decree effectively ruling out negotiations with Russia's president, which determined that holding negotiations with the Russian Federation's President Vladimir Putin is impossible. Guys, this is very, very, if you see now the timeline, you understand that the Ukrainians, they had the intention to sign a peace deal with Russia, but the British side banned them from doing so. And this is the video now that I'm talking about. Vladimir Putin, he revealed and explained that Ukraine signed peace agreement or draft peace agreement with Russia only to abandon it after Russia fulfilled the conditions of withdrawing troops from Kiev. So one of the preconditions was that Russia will lift the siege on Kiev and withdraw, and in exchange, the Ukrainian side will sign on this agreement. So let's see what Putin says. This is from the Russian point of view.
Когда не отказывался от переговоров. Вот хочу обратить ваше внимание на то, что при содействии того же президента Эрдогана, как вы знаете, в Турции прошла целая серия переговоров между Россией и Украиной по выработке и мер доверия, о которых вы сказали, и по подготовке самого текста договора. Этот договор, мы не договаривались с украинской стороной, что он будет носить конфиденциальный характер, но мы никогда его не предъявляли, не комментировали. Этот проект этого договора был парафирован руководителем переговорной группы из Киева. Он поставил там свою подпись. Вот он. Он есть. Он так и называется. Договор о постоянном нейтралитете и гарантиях безопасности Украины. Именно о гарантиях, о которых вы сказали, уважаемый друг, президент Южноафриканской Республики. 18 статей. Более того, к нему есть еще и приложение. Они, знаете, сейчас даже не буду об этом говорить, они касаются и вооруженных сил, касаются других вещей. Все прописано до единиц боевой техники и до личного состава вооруженных сил. Вот этот документ. Он парафирован киевской делегацией. Подпись стоит. Но после того, как мы, как и обещали, отвели войска от Киева, киевские власти, как обычно, делают их хозяева, выбросили это все на свалку истории. Скажем так, аккуратно и постараюсь интеллигентно.
So before I comment on this video, I will show you another video of Putin. Again, he is telling us who refused the negotiations.
Они отказались от этого. Где гарантии, что они и дальше не будут отказываться от каких-то других договоренностей? Но и в этих условиях мы никогда не отказывались от ведения переговоров. Уважаемые друзья, не мы, а руководство Украины объявило о том, что оно не будет вести никаких переговоров. Более того, действующий президент Украины подписал соответствующий декрет, запрещающий вести эти переговоры. Поэтому я понимаю вашу озабоченность, разделяю ее, и, безусловно, мы готовы рассмотреть любые ваши предложения, но мы не отказывались от переговоров. Отказалась украинская сторона. И декрет даже издали. Ну чего же от нас хотят?
So, the agreement was basically that the Russian side will withdraw from the territories it has recently occupied after February 28, 2022 in Donbass region, and also lift the siege on Kyiv. And in exchange, Ukraine will sign on a treaty of permanent neutrality of Ukraine, which of course means that Ukraine will remain neutral and will not join NATO and will not pose any security threat to Russia. And in exchange, Russia will respect the territorial integrity, sovereignty of Ukraine, and it will not intervene in its domestic affairs. And after that, we know what happened. Boris Johnson rushed to Ukraine and he told them they cannot put their signature on this deal. And then Zelensky issued a presidential decree criminalizing negotiations with the Russian side. So apparently we know who refused to sign on this peace treaty. And I think this something has become really difficult nowadays to engage in peace talks again between both sides. There need to be a trust building measures now before negotiations, because from the Russian point of view, that the Russians agreed on the Minsk Agreement 1, Minsk Agreement 2, and they both were violated by Ukraine. And not only that, the former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, says that this deal, and also the Holland, the President of France, former President of France, also says that this deal was just in order to buy time so that we can send weapons to Ukraine and be ready for a fight against Russia. So there were 3 agreements now violated from the Western side, let's say, because Ukraine is not independent, right? So Russia needs, in my opinion, trust building measures before they engage in any future peace talks, which seems that it's far away from the current times. I do not foresee any peace negotiations in the near future, to be honest with you. There was a very good thread about this, and I will just go through some of it. It's published by Olga. Yesterday, Putin revealed an extremely important piece of information. In April 2022, an agreement of permanent neutrality of Ukraine was signed draft agreement was signed between Russia and Ukraine. It also reveals that the Western narrative that Putin can't be trusted, just another projection. So the basic outline of the agreement is as follows. 1. Russia withdraws troops from Kyiv, Sumy, and Chernigov. 2. Ukraine declares neutrality. 3. Ukraine reduces its armed forces. 4. Ukraine gives up NATO aspirations in exchange for security guarantees from a number of countries. The countries in question are the UK, the US, Turkey, France, China, and Belarus. But what happened next will most likely go down in history as the beginning of an end of Ukraine as we know it. Russia did indeed withdraw its troops, which was joked about as a gesture of goodwill. It was coincided as the defeat of Russia in the Battle of Kyiv. It turns out that it was indeed a gesture of goodwill. Having snuffed it out, Boris Johnson flew to meet with Zelensky, who subsequently, quote, on the orders of Washington, threw this treaty into the dustbin of history. And I'm going to show you another proof of this, that this is accurate, guys. This is coming from the former Prime Minister of Israel. Russia-Ukraine peace talks was blocked by Western powers, former Israeli Prime Minister claims. So Naftali Bennett claims that he was set to broker a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, but his efforts were stopped by the major Western powers. According to the former Prime Minister, negotiations about this potential peace agreement started as early as 7th March 2022, merely weeks after the invasion began on 21st of February. Bennett traveled to Moscow in early March to meet with President Vladimir Putin. He was in constant communication with then British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and US President Joe Biden to coordinate on how to navigate talks about the possible ceasefire. Still, according to Bennett, Prime Minister Johnson was the most adamant about taking aggressive action against Putin. Scholz and Macron were exploring more pragmatic options, while Biden was in support of both approaches. I just want to make a correction, guys. I made a mistake. The Russian offensive on Ukraine started on the 21st, 22nd of February, not 28th. So the first round of talks happened, which after 4 days or something, it was probably on the 26th of February. But if we see what the former Prime Minister of Israel says, Britain was the most enthusiastic to take aggressive actions against Russia. Scholz and Macron were exploring more pragmatic options. Biden was in support of both approaches, according to him. Finally, I'm going to share with you a very short thread of an Iranian activist on Twitter, which I want you also to see what the Iranians think about it. Putin's revelations show that Zelensky was willing to end the war and sign a peace deal with Russia back in March 2022, but the US sent its asset, Boris Johnson, to Kyiv and killed the deal because this war was never about Ukraine. It was about US NATO using Ukraine as a weapon against Russia. US NATO want to destroy Russia. They want to regime change Putin and destroy Russia. And after Russia, they will come to China. They want to get rid of both Russia and China, their two main rivals. This is their ultimate goal. They want to dominate anyone and enslave the entire planet. But thank God, both Russia and China are well able to defend themselves. So guys, this is the summary of the draft agreement that was signed between the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, and this would have spared the lives of tens of thousands of people from the Ukrainian side and also from the Russian side. It would have spared a destruction in major Ukrainian cities, devastation, millions of refugees, a recession in Europe, gas prices are skyrocketing, energy crisis, inflation. A lot has happened after the Russian offensive on Ukraine because there was no peace agreement. So that is why in the previous video I said, and I repeat, the only way out of this conflict is diplomacy. It's whether now or in the future, and the future could be in a few months or in a few years or after 1 million people perish. They do not care, guys. The people in Washington and in London are criminals. They are psychopaths. They are criminal cabals that they are ready to kill millions of people, and they have done it before. Please remember, they killed 500,000 people in Syria, and they still refuse to acknowledge their mistake in Syria. They have killed hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq and Afghanistan. They have killed tens of thousands of people in Yugoslavia. They have killed millions in Korea. They have killed tens of thousands of people in Vietnam. They have killed millions and millions of people. And please don't be fooled by these democratic regimes. The politicians go and come, but the interests stay permanent. There are permanent interests governed by permanent deep states in these countries. And these permanent deep states are the ones who bring these politicians. And I'm not saying like they select them, but they pave the way and prepare the environment for these people to proceed and advance in their careers as politicians in certain political parties to reach on the top of their political parties. And when they're elected, they're already prepared enough to play the role that they have to play, just like Justin Trudeau, just like Boris Johnson, just like Joe Biden, just like many, many other politicians in the West. So yes, there are elections, but the permanent deep states in these countries have a strong, enormous influence over the political life. And if, let's say if, like, for example, Olaf Scholz, he didn't want to send these tanks to Ukraine, right? What happened to him? They ridiculed him. They criticized him harshly. They called him names. They even made sexist jokes about him. Basically, they portrayed him as a politician who doesn't have balls. And, they wanted to career assassinate him. So if you refuse their dictates, you will be smeared and your career will be over. So what do you think, guys, about this draft resolution? Do you think this should have been signed by Ukraine and Russia? And if yes or no, let me know your opinions in the comments below. I've been your host, Almassian of Syriana Analysis. If you're new, please subscribe and share this video with your friends, guys. And thank you so much, guys, for all the patrons who are supporting me. We are around now 105 patrons supporting my work financially. If you want to support my work, you can become a patron, link in the description below, and see you next time.